You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG. Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries, a podcast about Shadowdark and other role-playing games where two GMs talk about their recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. On the show today, we discuss the Meadery Mishap. Hello there, sages and adventurers. My name is Matt, and with me, as always, is my good GM friend? Good friend and GM colleague.
What is a GM friend? That's the question we all need to answer.
Jody, how are you doing despite my messing up of the introduction?
Oh, no, it's just a little bit sticky there at the beginning.
Okay.
But you're still a sweet guy.
Okay, we must move on. Today's episode focuses on an adventure that I played through and you ran, Jody, the Meadery Mishap. So why don't you take us to the table?
Happy to. A few months ago, I believe, the Arcane Library newsletter came out, and it called out some options for great starting or introductory adventures for Shadowdark. The Meadery Mishap was a short adventure by Dawn Fist Games that was highlighted there. I looked into it, and lo and behold, it fit in like a glove in my Saltmarsh Saturday ongoing campaign. So let me take you through the overview from this little adventure and give you a sense of what we're getting into here. The adventure takes place in a small coastal town called Brinewick, and Brinewick is famous for two things, oysters and the Sweet Mug Meadery. Now, the Sweet Mug Meadery is a cornerstone of the local economy. It produces a unique and highly coveted mead from a special honey that comes from an unusual place, the Honeywell Cave, located just south of the village. And there the bees produce a very special honey to make a very special mead. Now, the honey master has explained to the local meadery owner that the bees have become aggressive and they can no longer access this honey. Additionally, a few days before the PCs arrive in Brinewick, two oyster fishermen have gone missing, and the villagers speak of eerie wailing coming from a sea at night, and it's coming from a cave not far out of town. Now, the meadery owner has put up a job posting in the nearby village offering a handsome reward to anyone who can solve the honey crisis. And this is why the players are entering Brinewick.
All right, Jody, let us gather around the fire and have a little conversation and discussion about this adventure. So, we don't want to bury the lead here. We like to get right to it when we do a little review and discussion of a particular adventure or module or setting or whatever. So give me your top line takeaway. Do you recommend the Meadery Mishap?
I do, with only very, very, very minor reservations. I think this is, as advertised, an outstanding introductory adventure for Shadowdark and for groups coming from both 5e and OSE experiences to Shadowdark. So this is actually, I feel like this is the first time we're like, hey, this one's great. Check this out. We usually tend to be pretty critical. But
I was waiting with bated breath. I knew what your answer was, but I thought surely maybe there was a small percent chance that it well, this one also is not my favorite.
Yeah, no, and there is, we'll get into there's a few little, asterisks and things of like, hey, GM beware. But for the most part, I think if you are looking for onboarding some folks in a short adventure, 2-3 sessions could potentially be one session. I think for the folks who were able to get through 20 and 30 room dungeons in 3 hours, it still boggles my mind. But if that's you, then you could probably knock out this entire thing in an evening, no problem. So yeah, I really give it full props. As a GM, it spoke to me immediately. And then in terms of adaptability and use and what it offers in terms of player choice, I thought it was really well done for what it is.
So I'll also say, like, I really enjoyed both the dungeons in here. I mean, obviously, my thoughts about that one specific room that we talked about in a previous episode, I think I made my concerns and frustrations very clear. But that singular experience aside, which played an outsized role in that episode, but did not play an outsized role in our adventuring and delving into these two dungeons. I thought that these were great dungeons, and the way that you integrated them into the setting was wonderful. And when you handed me the adventure yesterday, after we had finished the second of the two dungeons, and I went home and kind of paged through it, it was really it was one of those fun and interesting opportunities as a player to be able to no, I've seen all the content in here, and so now I get to go and see what changes you made and stuff. So we'll get into all of that, but I wanted to say that from a player perspective, it was great. So let me kick you off here in terms of giving you something to respond to in terms of analyzing and discussing this adventure. I want to start with prep. It's something we haven't talked about very much on the show, and for a variety of reasons, namely because there's so much content out there about how to prep D&D and other role-playing games. What was the prep like for this? And then more broadly speaking, just in general, how have you been finding Shadowdark now that we've been doing this for quite some time in terms of prep? It's something we really specifically addressed in the show very much.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it highlights a strength of this and why I think I want to put my flag on Meadery Mishap as a great introductory starter place for Shadowdark. Is so that the company that makes it is called Dawnfist Games, and they're kind of their homepage, if you will, if you go to their website, has 3 core tenets: easy to learn, easy to play, easy to run. And they talk a little bit about each of those. Now they do, and this will come up later, they have their own bespoke system called Adventurous, and I know next to nothing about it other than it exists. So my experience with them is through this singular product, which my understanding is there is a follow-up product to this in the works. In terms of prep, yes, it met all 3 criteria. The module itself was easy to learn, it was easy to play, and it was easy to run. It was... In terms of prep time, I have been adapting Mike Shea's Lazy GM kind of cheat sheet, his 8 steps. I've cut that down actually quite a bit. It is, for me, it's less than 8. It was easy to adapt that in, and all the prep work I had to do was weaving it into my existing campaign notes of Saltmarsh and who are the NPCs there, what are the threads you guys as players are adventuring in, because this wasn't an introduction for us. It was a set of locations in an ongoing campaign. But again, that's a giant gold star, right? Is if I can easily take this thing that somebody else has created and I can quickly make the adjustments needed to include it in my prep. So other than changing some names to fit the campaign, spinning some maps around, much to your chagrin, as you were mapping the dungeons, and I kept saying the wrong direction because I was spinning maps in my head instead of just writing them down in the correct places. Other than that, I mean, it was just very much plug and play, which not a lot of products feel that way to me. It's short and to the point. It's short and sweet, and it's writing delivery style.
So the prep is easy. How was it to run at the table? Because in paging through it seems to very clearly be attempting the layout and kind of the guidance that you might get if you looked at the Arcane Libraries products or other Shadowdark adventures that have really tried to keep that ethos of clear, concise, and well laid out writing. Was this in that same vein?
Absolutely. It's a highly usable tool. The zine itself is only 17 pages long, but that's not really entirely accurate in that the way it's laid out, there's space given where space is needed. That here's the map, and then it's not quite here's the map, and then everything you need is there with the map. But on the next page in a spread, it gets you basically the whole dungeon. So you're not doing a ton of flipping. There are some bespoke monsters in it. They're all presented at the back, including using the open license of Shadowdark for the monsters that are in the core rulebook. It features those. So it makes good use of those known commodities, but they're referenced there in full, which, again, is always a great thing about Shadowdark. The in full reference of a monster is not even a paragraph. It's a little blip of stuff. So, yeah, and so I need to look up this monster. flip to the back. Okay, well, then I could jump back to my map and I'm ready to go. So yeah, I mean, my prep with it actually diminished, which is true, right? If you're using any product, even back when you were running Barrow Maze, the amount of time you had to spend with your head in the book diminished over time.
Sure.
Yeah, that's natural.
I mean, but I think here what is, and I mean, this is apples to oranges, right? Comparing a mega dungeon to this.
100%.
But the point remains that, yeah, as you get more familiar, sure, it makes sense. But I mean, we're looking at hard copies of these, Jody, and I just want to take this moment to plug my favorite product. Not an adventure, not an accessory for the gaming table. I guess actually it kind of is. It is the long handle stapler, and it is my single favorite thing I have purchased that has improved and it has just elevated my gaming because I can print zines out. Now, I know there are zine staplers out there. I know there are these fancy staplers specifically made for zines, but just buying a long handle stapler, these things are cheap. We'll put a link in the show notes to the Swin line, the Cadillac of long handle staplers. But printing out zines, these like A5 zines as a booklet, using just a standard PDF viewer, printing them out as a booklet and then stapling them and then being able to reference them at the table is just, it's great. You can do this with the quick start guides. We have so many player quick start guides just ready to go at all times to make sure that we are never caught in a moment where we can't play Shadow Dark.
That's right.
So anyways, I just wanted to say, like, we're looking at these and we're paging through them, and you printed them out. Shadow Dark doesn't necessarily it's not kind to your black ink, but this was a pretty usable tool, not just as a PDF, but actually more so as a physical product.
Right.
I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
And I mean, case in point, I handed you mine that I'd been using for these sessions, so you can see my little scribbled notes as you're a proponent and apostolizer of the write in your books. And there was lots of times it was really useful to write in my book. So yeah, my prep really reduced as I used it because I just realized it was a useful tool. And I was kind of initially, when I worked with it, was using my full regular prep routine. And then by the end was like, this is actually repetitive. The zine will get done what I need it to get done at the table. I don't really need to be doing the double prep. So it, cut it really down to, very few items. Secrets and Clues was the big one I wrote out. And that was because, again, I was trying to make sure beyond the scope of what's in the module, it was delivering information into the wider campaign world.
Got it.
So I had to have that prep. But again, if you're coming to this cold, everything you need is there. And I would recommend, print it out and then just take notes, because there's also enough space in it that the layout is easy to read and easy to use at the table. And so they in their own, like, it's easy to use. I'm like, it's a very easy to use product. So that's another huge prop.
So let's keep going with some of the positives and kind of dive into, well, you can start with either dungeon, but I think it makes sense to start with the B dungeon, which we've talked a little bit about. But I wanted to get a sense of, like, what, this is not a traditional, at least this particular dungeon isn't the traditional dungeon. It's not like dark and terrible and horrifying, and there's far less of that kind of grimdark in this what is actually at kind of face value a rather charming adventure.
Right.
You're trying to save a meadery. Whee!
Yeah. Well, and that's what I wanted to start with is in terms of tone, it gives the table options of access, right? You're not immediately committed to grimdark. You're not immediately committed. So if you're coming from another system and your playstyle isn't grimdark, and maybe your playstyle is more heroic, well, you're immediately coming to the Honeywell Cave to do something heroic. You are saving a local business that is a cornerstone of the local economy. Another thing I love is that in its brevity, it also gives a lot of choice. Again, we've talked about this, I don't know how much, with Shadow Dark, and we will continue to talk about it with Shadow Dark, is that the space for GM and players to make choices about how things are resolved. So you actually get, in the opening, before we really unpack the Honeywell Cave, you get an overview of the little village of Brinewick. It's not something I used because, again, I was using Saltmarsh, so I just cherry picked a few items from it to drop into Saltmarsh. But you could start in Brinewick talking with the person that's sending you out, the meadery owner, to send you out on the mission, and getting to know the people in the town and doing that kind of thing. And if that's familiar to your play group, dive in there. Or if you're like, I want to get to the heart of things, bam, just start at the cave. They already have the job as the players, and start exploring. And it's that premise that drew me in of, so we're at Honeywell Cave, and we're trying to figure out what's going on with the bees, why they won't let you harvest the honey. And this gets across one of those core Shadow Dark and greater OSR principles of combat is not a sport. We as a player group can't go in here and just start hacking and slashing through the bees, because we would literally be killing the livelihood of the people. We would be undoing the very thing we've been tasked to do. So now we have this interesting problem of monsters that aren't there just to be killed. We have to think of other ways to interact with said monsters. And that for me is why I go, man, as an introductory product of like, hey, we're starting to see Shadow Dark. We're coming from maybe a new school D&D mindset, and we're going to try something OSR. Well, here's a reason other than the monsters will kill you because they're big and bad and combat's not fair, that we have to approach combat as players with a different mindset. And I immediately fell in love with that. And I know we have a difference of opinion on this, the environmental challenges that are presented by the cave itself, which could be handled in a way that we would both find very satisfactory.
Sure.
Even if
totally.
the rolling thing was not your bag, there's no reason you couldn't just adjust that if that's not, if you know, as a GM, if you've listened to that back episode and you're like, yeah, I totally agree with Matt, and who would fault you there, then, but he suggested some easy changes, and just make those changes. So those two ideas of interesting environment that's tonally not grimdark, and you're not interacting with the bees in an aggressive first mindset, that at just step one of getting into this, I went, yes, you're sending the right message immediately.
The signposting was excellent. I mean, like, I will say that I really enjoyed that the adventure had some whimsy. Now, I am well and truly on record as loving a bit of whimsy on the other side of the sort of coin of grimdark and horror and survival horror. If we were talking about Shadow Dark, I guess is more specific. But long story short, from a player's perspective, the actual adventure, the actual like delving into the caves was cool for a couple of reasons. I liked the environmental stuff because it was unique. It wasn't just you're in a dungeon, flagstone, path in front of you, walls are 10 feet apart, 10-foot high ceilings, et cetera, et cetera. You come to a wood door. It was in a cavern. It was covered with honey. There were unique monsters. I thought it was like a very, it's not reinventing the wheel, but it at least was fresh from the perspective of it used some familiar monsters. It used some unfamiliar monsters. So the bees were cool. They are devastating, but not necessarily in a way that I thought was unfair. Their ability to sting you and then put you to 0 hit points if you don't pass an easy con check, like that's pretty gnarly. But there are also ways to mitigate and get around that if you kind of play smart and don't try and take their honey, or at all of the other things you could do to make them angry. But that's that. So from a player perspective, I 100% agree with you. The other thing that I found interesting as a player is that I don't know, and I didn't actually look into this particularly closely, but the only thing that I thought that some players might not like is because your purpose for going in there is not specifically to collect treasure, that XP might seem fairly few and far between. So I don't know. Is that something that you felt like you were going to have to adjust? I don't think anyone in our play group was frustrated or even thought twice about the amount of XP. But I did kind of see that as like, oh, in retrospect, I don't know how much treasure's in there. And because treasure seems to be the thing people focus on most for XP, might that be a problem?
So I'm going to put the big disclaimer in now that if you are listening to this and this sounds rad and you're very excited about it, but you are a player, please skip to the end or join us in our future episodes, because I'm going to go into to answer that question and other things going forward here, especially around specifically the Honeywell Cave. I'm going to have to really do some spoilery things.
It's a review of the modules. So
right. It's, usual internet disclaimers apply. So there it is. I said it. We can move on. No. And this is another thing I really celebrate about this module is no, I didn't worry about XP because it does embed treasure throughout the dungeon. And it's really neat because they call out the treasure with normal, fabulous, exceptional, like literally using the Shadow Dark criteria of leveled XP, which I haven't seen, frankly, many, if any, products do. So it's prompting you as a GM when to award XP during the session and how much to, in the designer's estimation, you should be awarding. And there is still treasure in the dungeon. One of the fun things about the Honeywell Cave is if the adventurers do a little recon, or as a GM, you just give them a little like, hey, here's some upfront info. Again, like we talked about, this totally would make sense to just hand them a map from the meadery keeper, the beekeeper. Like any of those would work because there's a whole southern branch that you guys never messed with.
Yeah, we thought about going down there, but yeah.
That's full of gray oozes, which are pretty gnarly. But there's also dead adventurers in there who went down in there before and got gray oozed and have treasures. There is a magic sword that's been left in a pool that you can go find, or at the end you could have the queen bee say like, hey, there's this magic sword. By the way, it might have a drawback to it. Whatever it may be, there is plenty of XP to be had in the cave itself. This does take me, though, to my first critique, though, of this particular module is it's listed as an adventure for levels 1 to 3. If you took a group of first level characters into this encounter, the only real grumble I have with the thing is when you get to the end, and this is the mystery of the Honeywell Cave, is some gnolls have taken up residence in the bottom of the cave and are smoking out the bees, which is why they're super angry and filling the cave with smoke and messing with the bees. And so they're all pissed off.
Acrid smoke, though. It's like
I played up that description, but I think that's a good idea. Like talk about that there is smoke, especially as you move down into the lowers of the cave, that the smoke, and there is literally, you get to a point where there's a chimney and there's smoke coming out of it. If you as a GM don't kind of dole out the gnolls that are making camp down at the very bottom, there is a gnoll shaman who is a level 4 critter all by himself. He is capable and no joke. And he has with him 5 additional gnolls. If you are a group of 4 or 5 first level characters, 5 gnolls and a level 4 gnoll shaman is, wow, that's a lot. That's a lot. And prior to that, there are 3 more gnolls that are tending a fire and a chimney coming up. And I had them, once you guys started messing with stuff, they came to you and you guys used them clawing out of the hole into the room as a tactical terrain advantage and totally rocked it. And I thought that was really fun to like let the players leverage this space, and a couple misses and the gnolls would be in the room and on you. And, it could have gone either way. Let the dice decide through combat. But 8 gnolls and a gnoll shaman is what waits at the bottom of the cave that is causing the problem in a straight fight, which is a tenet of, OSR. If you do not want straight fights, you leverage the encounter and blah, 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 blah. And yes, you could loop around and come in the back of the cave on the gnolls. And there's lots of options. But if a group is combat first, modern D&D minded, they should, in my estimation, 8 gnolls and a gnoll shaman should TPK a group of 5 first or second level characters. They should be able to mop the floor with them because the gnoll shaman by itself is no joke. and
Sure.
can neutralize people pretty quickly. So that is that's one of my the couple minor quibbles of for a first to third level adventure, 8 gnolls and a shaman packed into a small space. That's hard.
Yeah, I mean, I'm having looked at the adventure now. It is interesting. Like the introduction calls out that the gnolls can be reasoned with potentially, but I know that I know your take on gnolls in terms of having played in your world. That was never necessarily going to be a thing that we could do, just given the nature of gnolls being almost pure chaos and the way that the lens through which you see that specific kind of or group of monsters of just they're just bad. They
Right. They fall in my just bad monster net.
Yeah, but I do think that another group or another GM who wanted to play that up, you could do that. I think that this is interesting because I find there are so many level 1 through 2 or 1 through 3 adventures. I mean, obviously that's where the vast majority of people are going to start. But I do think that one of the interesting things to I don't know, at least to experience while reading these adventures, because there's so many of them, we can't possibly play all of them. But one thing that I've found in the various kind of game jams and then also the stuff that's put out by more established creators in the Shadowdark space is there's a pretty wide margin of difficulty for level 1 through 3 adventures. And I don't mean that just in terms of monster level difficulty. I mean that in terms of just how challenging and I guess more so how carefully do you need to move through the dungeon, how many traps there are, etc. Because there were basically no traps in this dungeon. And that actually might be a critique for somebody else. I think for us, I don't know. I am not a huge fan of the classic style traps that are just ha ha. But I think there's an argument for why they aren't just bad full stop. They just aren't necessarily to my taste. Maybe we should talk about traps at some point. But I think it's interesting because ultimately what I have seen is that level 1 through 3 dungeons, which is usually the level band, almost always try to have a TPK in there somewhere. It's almost like the price of admission for an OSR, especially Shadowdark dungeon. If you look at Lost Citadel of the Scarlet Minotaur, there's a couple of TPKs potentially in there for level 1 characters. That is something I have noticed. It is, I think, a tenet of design. It's also something that I go back and forth about whether or not I like that being something that seems to be the convention of dungeon design, because I don't know, we're not looking for balanced encounters, but also is there a way that we could smooth that out, and maybe there are adventures out there that do, but maybe take the difficulty and spread it out through the dungeon and have factions that if you make them angry, they're going to coalesce and then you create the circumstances for the TPK. But like you're saying, if you just walk in the front door and make the gnolls mad, you're just dead. And to a certain extent that makes sense. To a certain extent it also just can create a situation where you're just racking the characters pretty quickly. So I don't know. I don't know if there's anything you want to take out of that long ramble, but I'm sort of thinking out loud and extemporaneously about my thoughts more generally about dungeons and adventure modules.
No, I totally think that's a valid point and critique of this genre or classification of module. So if I'm approaching all of this from the lens of an onboarding module, and I think for an onboarding module, that is a thing I tend to bristle at of here is something super gnarly that will kill you in the name of OSR.
Yeah.
And it feels that way to me often. I think there's a lot of ways to mitigate the gnolls in this. I had some of them attack you outside of the cave on your way in, and I just counted them as part of the 8. And so the 2 that you killed reduced the total. And then the ones that were on scout duty came in and it reduced the total. And it's a total number that's counting down. That's a very common module task. So do that. I love that it's not freaking goblins for the 8 millionth time, which would actually make this harder because the inability to sneak up on them would make that encounter all the worse. It's not kobolds for the bajillionth time. Like, I love that it is like, no, gnolls are no joke. They will, can be a real problem if, they hit you in mass and they're angry. It's a problem. So I like that part. It's just as an onboarding caution, don't just willy-nilly wander in there with your party if you're wanting to use this as an onboard. If it's an ongoing campaign like mine was, I mean, I still metered them out to you guys, but I was like, no, they're going to let you have it. Like they're kind of come after you guys. And thankfully you had, your wizard has a pretty effective means of dealing with that took experience points off the table because the Gnoll Shaman has some good loot on him. You turned him to stone. Good on you. Kept him out of the fight. You guys handled the fight. No problem. Except that now you've turned all of his XP to stone, which we found it to be a really lovely.
It was great.
Yeah, like it stunk that you guys lost out on, but it also was
no.
Like the
everyone
give and
was
take was
totally
great.
fine.
Yeah, everybody was fine with not fighting the Gnoll Shaman.
Well, what was interesting is, and so my character found this unbelievably powerful, what is ostensibly pillar of salt, but it is in our case where it is a arcane spell, pillar of stone, but with the rules ostensibly the same. So. Yeah, and I will say that what I enjoyed about the encounters in this dungeon is that they all felt distinctly different. And for me, that's the sign of a great dungeon is can you pack a bunch of really interesting elements into a nice tight package? And I think that this bee cavern dungeon did almost everything right. And I agree, like Jody, you and I maybe have a perspective or a philosophy on beginner dungeons and stuff like that doesn't line up with the maybe the common wisdom or the kind of the conventional wisdom. But I do think that I agree with you from a player's perspective that this felt like there was good signposting, interesting encounters, interesting and not hard to understand factional elements, some basic factional elements, good ideas for you could build a whole campaign out of some of the stuff that's going on here. It references the gnolls have moved in from some other place. It was like, now you have this additional adventure hook. So speaking of additional adventure hooks, what I want to do is talk about the second dungeon, which actually I think plays second fiddle just because of the name of the adventure. But I actually may have enjoyed it more, perhaps contextual to the way that I experienced it in your campaign. But the second dungeon features, I don't actually know, I didn't look this up, like a hag-ish kind of an undead, I don't know. Walk me through this because I mostly was paying attention to the honey. I'll be honest, actually, just for a moment, I didn't know that this dungeon was in here, and so last night I kind of just paged through, and I went and the first dungeon in the book is the Seaweed Grotto, and I went, Jody gave me the wrong book,
and then you were like, wait, I just played this.
Literally 45 minutes ago, I was in this dungeon, so. I very quickly read mostly the Honeywell Cave. So talk to me about the grotto, the Seaweed Grotto.
I'll just steal their words right off the top of the introductory overview page. Says the grotto, once a smuggler's hideout, is now home to the kelp horror, whose wailing can be heard at night along the coast. So you have this thing that they refer to as the kelp horror, and it is a unique monster of their own design. It has a picture of what appears to be a night hag or hag of some sort, so at the back with it. Also, just really quick, Carlos Castillo does the art for this module. Love it. Love love his art. It's fantastic all the way through it. It's got a very unified aesthetic. If you've been on the Facebook page, you've seen his art advertised. It's just a great look. And there's a piece for the kelp horror. But yeah, you have these disappearing fishermen that you can be sent out to go look for. Again, if you start in the town of Brinewick, there's another here's another option. Here's something else going on. And your players choose to go after this. So in the Seaweed Grotto, you're going in to find out what has happened to these missing fishermen. And it is a coastal cave network with these big pools dividing out or bisecting rather these large sea caverns. And as you make your way through, it's only a 5-room dungeon. Now, I do want to caution, it is not a 5-room dungeon. It is a dungeon that has 5 rooms.
It's a dungeon that has 5 rooms.
Right. So for those of you who know your 5-room dungeon, it certainly could be a 5-room dungeon with a minor tweak. If you wanted to level it up, the entrance, for example, just kind of sets the tone of the place. There's no real encounter. It just gives you the vibes. Throw a giant crab in there and you literally do have an actual 5-room dungeon then, because there's the first room supposed to be a guardian, blah, blah, blah. And basically you just work your way through, and there's some really kind of cool and interesting. I really played up the otherworldliness of this place, putting like a half-sunken ship in one of the sea caves. I posted a picture of that. It was a very small ship in the model, but it got the idea across. There are giant leeches in some of the pools that you fight through. I just made them into big tentacles. And then one of the key features of the kelp horror is her wailing and screaming. And so when the tentacles would get injured, I would narrate out this screaming. It is a challenging fight with her because she attacks and screams. This is a dice roll. I imagine it was 2 dice heavy for you.
Well, okay, I want to talk about this.
We can jump to the end. At the end, you find her, you fight her, and that's the adventure.
Let's talk about the kelp horror and discuss die rolling here, Jody, because this was an interesting encounter, an interesting room, and I want to dive into it. So the kelp horror has, a sort of standard issue stat block, AC 13, 2 claw attacks, D6 damage, but she gets to wail every single turn. All enemies in near of her have to make a DC 12 wisdom check, or they have disadvantage on the next check or attack. She can also drown her victims and is also undead. Thank goodness.
Yeah, you guys, your priest worked that undead angle.
But your question was this too much dice rolling? I'm not a huge fan of the save or get disadvantage, but to me, it was an interesting enough encounter, and it was an interesting enough space. And frankly, disadvantage is terrible, but there are ways to mitigate it. And also, you, I think, did some things with people being immune to it. And I think it could be pretty frustrating. It could turn into quite a slog. And I have a feeling that this is maybe one of your other critiques, but I think it's something for GMs to be aware of. It didn't frustrate me, perhaps because the encounter, the arc of the combat encounter was one of challenge, but not one of just complete randomness and feeling like there were no mitigating factors that we could do. Like, the room was big enough we could just stand on the other side of the room and maybe we wouldn't actually get hit through near distance whale. So there were some things we could do, but I don't know. Talk to me about it from your perspective. Did you have a sense going in that there was going to be some problems, or like, did you prepare to mitigate this, or did you just let it rip?
I let her rip, and the way the adventure played out presented something really interesting that I was delighted in how it resolved itself. So something we haven't talked about yet is both of these caves have their own random encounter tables, and they call out the danger level and how often you should be rolling for random encounters. Now, you and I use the crawling clock and have the crawling clock going at its normal rate, which is accelerated from the baseline.
It's basically
threat.
always deadly if
Right.
you use the exploding D6 mechanic.
Right.
So, yeah.
So it was risky. So one of the results on the random encounter table is that the kelp horror rises from the water and ambushes the party. And she happened to show up a room early, in a room which has a chamber full of stalactites and stalagmites that are totally full and extra prone to loud noises or combat breaking loose and falling, and you have to dodge them. So her wailing in that room was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy times. And you guys worked the system really well. Definitely got into the age-old to what degree is turn undead encompassing and the undead things fleeing from you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I continue to feel good about like the undead are fleeing from the holy beacon, and that doesn't mean, especially in the case of a sentient undead like her, not a zombie, she'll go attack other things, especially if she is bound to a pool or something.
Yeah,
like
no,
that.
I mean, I gave you a little grief for it, but I thought but that was just in jest. I agree. I find the binary of turn undead, like either the being is effective or it is just running for its life, and it won't attack anything. Like if you're on the way,
yeah, or if you are the end of the room away from the priest, it will get there and start eating you, like because it's getting away from the priest and you're in the way. It's going to eat you. So I was aware of the wailing and that it could get away from the party very quickly. The other big point to know with the hag the kelp horror, is there's some backstory about her and where she comes from and what her background is. And I used that to infuse some narrative and have her have a personality and deliver some lore and information about what's going on and confirm / enhance some other clues you guys have gotten in your campaign. In the module itself, the story of the kelp horror is that she is the abbess from the Dawn Seeker Abbey that is located north of Brunswick. This is the forthcoming module from Dawnfist. Apparently,
I did not know that.
Is they're writing Dawn Seeker Abbey, and so you would be able to continue play into that, which I will definitely be checking out, and I'm excited to see. They are working on it because the artist posted here's the cover for it, and I was already enthralled by what's in the cover. So I haven't done a ton of looking into it, but I was like, oh, that it is happening. So yeah, that was kind of my take on it. It was like, yeah, just be aware if they start failing dice rolls left and right, and now that's compounded, and they're getting dragged into the water, and they're being drowned because somebody's in heavy armor, and there's a lot of layers of this could quickly turn into a players doing the I don't know what you wanted us to do. Yeah. Which is a lousy feeling as a GM. You don't want your players to go like, hey, I don't know what the hell you wanted us to do. Even when the players are wrong in saying it, it's a bummer when that's where a session ends up. And the kelp horror can get there. What I will say of the Seaweed Grotto, though, is it does not. The kelp horror is manageable by a group of first and second level characters without too much, not without trouble. Mm-hmm. I mean, she's nasty, but it's not unattainable. It's like, oh man, it's a single target, right? And she does have a tentacle and a zombie in the room with her. That's an option if you want to do that. There's some options for things you can, levers and dials you can pull. Mm-hmm. In our case, you guys had beat the hell out of her in that first encounter. Yeah. And so I had her just flee back to her original lair because, sharing tilting my GM hand, I knew you were going to kill her. I wanted you to get the lore dump out of her. And then, so I pulled her back from this rage and then was able to deliver the lore, and you guys got it ended up being much more dramatic to get the kill shot because the first few attacks missed. And I was like, oh no, she's going to have her last hurrah. But I think
the natural one on the turn undead was unexpected and
ill-timed.
Yeah.
As always is the case.
So what I like about this is it felt like I bought this adventure and I got a free dungeon because it has, it plugs into the setting, quote unquote, what minimal setting there is, but quality setting nonetheless. but it feels like the Meadery Mishap is a misleading title, and extra dungeon should be the subtitle. But long and short of it is it's a very linear dungeon. There's almost no jigwazing of the dungeon or whatever. That said, you get it basically for free, quote unquote, and it's a fun thing to do that, like you did, can give additional lore and build out the world. So this one, I think you could get done. I mean, we got it done in a very short period of time. And I will just say, for the record, we were faffing about, Jody. Like, there was a level of...
There was some faff.
And you had built this into like a place we'd previously been, specifically like my character had previously been, and I was just so annoyed that it had been like this place had been magically changed and yada yada yada. It was very cool, but I think there's much to recommend any adventure that just kind of gives you something extra, and this definitely feels like that, even though it comes first in the
yeah. Well, Brinewick comes first, and then you get into and then at the end.
But anyways,
so,
anything else you want to say about either of these two dungeons, or any other quibbles or things that you feel like were particularly awesome?
Well, I want to address the Minotaur in the room before we move on.
Yeah.
For most folks, the introduction to Shadowdark is the free adventure presented in the DM's handbook, the free DM's handbook, the Citadel of the Scarlet Minotaur.
The Lost Citadel of the Scarlet Minotaur, Jody.
Sorry, the Lost Citadel of the Scarlet Minotaur, which I have to own. I have neither played nor run. I have been very curious to play in it. I have no desire to run it, especially as an introductory adventure. Every time I have read through it, I find myself thinking, one, this is big. This dungeon, the Lost Citadel, is huge. That's a lot to get through in an introductory session. Two, a Minotaur versus first and second level characters should be more than a handful. And as we talked about earlier, man, TPKs seem to be all over this thing. Even with we're going to make friends with some of these factions, there are a few of the factions that are just overtly aggressive. Like, unless you are a GM who your default is yes and, in which case none of this matters anyway, because your default is yes and, so things work out, and that's a very fun style of play. However, if combat happens in the Lost Citadel of the Scarlet Minotaur, man, every time I look at it, I'm like, that seems deadly. That seems deadly. Oof, that seems deadly. Unless your players are already well versed in OSR style play of hyper caution and care, and in our Discord recently, there was a lot of talk about that notion of lethality, and not that Shadowdark is or isn't lethal, but just, man, having players feeling frustrated about death. And for me, when I looked at the Meadery Mishap, it answered those concerns. You have a little bit more familiarity with the Lost Citadel of the Scarlet Minotaur than I do. And I have to put, listeners, hear me doing my disclaiming of have not played, have not run.
Right.
And that is a core value of this show, is like, we've played it, we've run it, we're going to speak intelligently about it because we've had a real experience. Intelligence ? But we've had a valid experience. I have not experienced that module in real life. But even on paper, this felt like I would run this anytime for any group, full stop. I cannot say that about that other adventure because I haven't run it.
Yeah, so I haven't run either, but I will say that Evo Unnamed John on the Shadowdark Discord has run it, I think, about 1,000 times, and has done tons of learn to plays with it. And so he would genuinely disagree with you, I think, in terms of, is it a good starter adventure? I would be interested to hear what someone who is a veteran of running the module would say in response to that. I would be genuinely curious. So, we'll try and ping him and see if we can get him to kind of give us his thoughts on in the Dungeon Master Diaries thread. For me, the thing about that module that has just not grabbed me is just it's not the kind of adventure module that I am interested in. So I think you haven't run it for very specific reasons. I haven't run it just for kind of, I don't know, content or thematic reasons. It's just not the thing that I've wanted to run. I am going to run it soon-ish.
Yeah, I've literally built all the models I need to run it and like painted them, and I have it all set.
Yeah.
And just every time I look at it, longtime listener and friend of the show, Jason, has run it a bunch of times, and he has nothing but good things to say about it. So I don't want this in any way to come across as like dunking on,
Sure,
because obviously a lot of folks have had a lot of success, and people we know who have a lot of experience with Shadow Dark have had success with that module. I think more so I want to address that this is a very different inroad. The Meadery Mishap gives a much different option for how to approach it, and I think it's an easier onboard, especially if one of the $1 million Shadow Dark questions is always, my group's playing 5e, they're playing modern D&D, and I'd like them to try Shadow Dark because I'm exhausted from running that system. And I would offer, hey, you could do worse than taking a look at the Meadery Mishap and trying to onboard them that way.
yeah. I completely agree, Jody. The last thing I want to say about onboarding and about this adventure from a player's perspective is I want to highlight the fact that the signposting is great, the telegraphing is great. I think there are some things you can do as a GM to elevate that telegraphing to really make the adventure and the dungeon, specifically the Honeywell Cave dungeon, sing. The last thing I want to say though is I am kind of philosophically opposed to, and I think I've said this on the show before, I'm just kind of philosophically opposed to the body count GM. I don't know what to call it. Like this feeling that like the number of PCs that you have killed as a GM is in some way reflective of running the game correctly or is something to be proud of. Again, if that's a particular table's jam, great. But I do still see folks chiming in from time to time about how many PCs have died in their game, and it doesn't ring true to me. Like we have been playing Dolmenwood for a long time, and we have a long list of characters who have perished. It is not, in terms of timeline, it is not necessarily the death fiesta that one would think Shadow Dark is in many cases. So, broadly speaking, I like to push back on that because I think that is a style of play. It is often the kind of default or what people think about Shadow Dark, and also what I see sometimes promulgated as a goal.
I couldn't agree more, and I love that the Meadery Mishap gives an onboarding opportunity that frankly just pulls back from that. It's not that it's not lethal. Again, see the gnolls and the
and the bees.
Kelporer,
they take you directly to 0 hit points.
Yeah, the bees, bam, can't pass a 9, you're down. The other kind of thing is I always feel like the death discussion is just really reductivist of the OSR. I have a deep love of old school modules, and also increasingly the realization that the OSR is distinct from actual old D&D. Classic D&D was not what the OSR is. It's its own special thing. But I really do feel like if we're talking body counts like you're describing, it's just reductivist to what is great about the OSR. And I feel like it not only misses the point, but it obfuscates what's great. It takes away the discussion from what's great. And I think the Meadery Mishap hits a nice balance. I don't know that I would put the Meadery Mishap up as a great example of OSR. In fact, I would probably say it's not. I think it's pretty new school in its philosophy. That's why I have nice things to say about it, not because I'm all new, let's be superheroes, but because it gives you an onboard to a OSR and an introduction to it that feels familiar no matter what style of play you enjoy.
Dungeon Master Diaries is brought to you by Wizlock, the industry leader in treasure security. Wizlock is an easy-to-install security system that uses patented arcane technology to monitor your hoard while you return to the dungeon for more. With so many knaves and ne'er-do-wells about looking to abscond with your loot, don't rely on a simple lock and key. Put your trust in Wizlock. It's easy to install. Just carve the arcane symbols into a door frame, secure the gem above the keystone, and recite the script on the Getting Started scroll. It's as simple as that. Jody, you installed Wizlock in your home recently and have made sure to protect all of your valuables, all of your various treasures you've accumulated over the course of your entire life. Tell us a little bit about the installation process. Was it as easy as Wizlock would have us believe?
You know, it was every bit as easy as they describe. I am not what you call handy with the tools, so I was really worried, but I got through it so much so that I recommended it to the folks at the Sweet Mug Meadery, and had they used it, they would not have had that problem with those gnolls.
Ah, there you go. Hey, look, a little tie-in. And that's right, even non-magic users can install Wizlock, and people who can't use a wrench. With their patented Magical Dabbler Potion add-on, those without arcane knowledge or tomes will be able to install the device during the potion's 1-hour use time window. If you would like to ensure the safety of your loot today, send a Raven to Wizlock with your information and mention this podcast, and they will send someone out to your abode for a free consultation. No purchase required. Wizlock. Outsmart the knaves. All right, Jody, let us bring this topic into the light with our core takeaways from this episode. Why don't you get us started?
All right. So in terms of onboarding, we've talked a lot about opening adventures and onboarding this episode, and that I think the Meadery Mishap does a great job of just that. If you're going to be onboarding somebody to Shadowdark, you are showing them Shadowdark from some other system, some other experience. The kind of takeaway question I would give to somebody is, what aspect of that system do you want them to see first? What is it about Shadowdark that you think is great that you want them to experience? If your answer is that their players and their characters are going to die, maybe back up. But I don't think that's what any GM thinks. There's something about Shadowdark that you think is cool. Make sure that the onboarding session really highlights and celebrates that. That's mine.
Yeah, so on that same note, I think that our games, especially Shadowdark, they're in dungeons, they're dark, they're gritty, they are grim dark. And I think that little bits of whimsy and little bits of, moments of fun that are actually in game, that aren't just somebody making some lewd joke around the table or something like that, but that are actually like moments where the players are met with a genuinely fun or funny or whimsical scenario. Those can break things up, and they can make the horror actually that much more terrifying, because it's not like, oh, here is yet another dungeon in which we will be risking our lives to seek treasure and attempting to avoid the goblins and et al. Monsters.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, look at the random tables in Shadowdark. There is some really delightfully silly stuff in there. Dwarves having cups of coffee just in the middle of dungeons. It's great stuff. My last takeaway is this. A combat that cannot be avoided or solved with a sword is interesting and not always. You don't want to do it every time. But once in a while, you're going to have to go through this combat, and you can't just kill the thing, and you have to go through it. That problem to solve is novel in a really interesting way pretty regularly for player characters. Again, don't do it all the time, because we like solving our problems by blowing them up and stabbing them. That's why we play RPGs. One of the reasons. But it's a great trick in the toolkit, and the Honeywell Cave does just that.
So my final one is that we need more adventures with novel, grounded premises, Jody, and ones that aren't just meat grinders. I know we've been beating this dead horse or dead adventure but I am not a huge fan of gonzo dungeons. I think there's a lot of them in the OSR. They're not my cup of tea. I find that it is really hard, and it is a genuine success when folks can write a dungeon that feels like it is grounded in some kind of reality, even if it's a fantastical reality, but there's grounded elements, like things, quote unquote, make sense. There is a place for the underworld that does not make sense, the Gonzo dungeon. But there's also a place for interesting premises that also have grounded solutions and grounded problems to solve.
As the torchlight grows dim, we hope you were able to find something useful in this episode that you can take into a future game. If you have any questions or unique experiences from your table that you'd like us to discuss in a future episode, you can email us at dmdiariespod@gmail.com. You can reach out to us too on YouTube or Facebook, but best of all, get at us on the Dungeon Master Diaries thread on the Shadow Dark Discord channel. You can find links to those feeds and any other materials we referenced in this episode's show notes. Until next time, may that honey be so, so sweet.
Oh, God. It was a little loud there on the old music. Dungeon Master Diaries is a production of the Stingbat Radio Network. It is produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by Matt Bruner. Intro and outro music is composed by Christian Schuster, and Dungeon Master Diaries is an independent production and is not affiliated with the Arcane Library, LLC. Shadow Dark RPG is a product of the Arcane Library. Copyright 2023. I've got plenty of time at the end of this. Just keep talking. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, yeah. Honeybee.